All right, so let's get into this discussion now. So the World Bank is urging South Africa to consider relaxing its black economic empowerment and labour policies. This is to allow for more foreign investment into the country. The global lender says that changes are necessary due to market realities. Of course, the question we're asking is, how will this affect the country's transformative agenda? To help us answer this and other related questions, we are joined by the Executive Director for IRR Legal, Gabriel Crouse. We also were joined by the Free Market Foundation's Deputy Head of Policy, Dr Morne Malan. Also joining the conversation is Matthew Parks, who is the parliamentary coordinator for Cosatu, and on the line we are also joined by Kganki Matabane, who is of course the CEO of the Black Business Forum. Gentlemen, good evening to you and thank you so much for joining us. I think I want to start really with, I suppose, a look back, as we did see, towards the end of last week, our very own Xolani Mbanjwa, who is of course our business editor here at Newzroom Afrika, having this discussion. He caught up with Jacques Morissette, the World Bank's lead economist and program leader for South Africa, who says South Africa needs jobs, not BEE. Listen to what he had to say to Xolani Mbanjwa.
So what we're saying in the report is that black empowerment policies are legitimate, and I think they're very important. You need to correct historical inequalities, and so we completely agree with the objectives. The question, and it's more a question for a dialogue, what is the best instrument to correct this historical inequality? So that's what we're discussing in the report. And what we're coming out is that it's from what we have seen in other countries. The most important improvement you can do in the life of people who have been, inequality treated in history is to give them jobs. And that's why we believe that the focus should be much more on creating jobs, including training and providing skills, than to enforce, businesses to be part of a different investment. The focus should be much more on jobs than on creating entrepreneurs in the short run. Because if you train people and you give them jobs, in 10 years' time, they will be the entrepreneurs of this country. So it's by step. But what we're saying is what the Department of Industry and Commerce is already doing in some cases. For some companies, they call it equivalent program. So the focus is on creating jobs, not necessarily to create entrepreneurs, which should be the objective. But it takes time. You're not born entrepreneurs. You need to get the skills. That's what we're advocating in the report.
Well, there you have it. The World Bank saying South Africa needs to create jobs, not entrepreneurs. And so the suggestion here is to ease black economic empowerment policies. We're also joining our panel this evening with Dr Pali Lehohla, who's, of course, the former statistician-general. Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for joining us. I actually want to give the floor first to Dr Morne Malan, who's the Deputy Head of Policy at the Free Market Foundation. You've actually been making this call for many years alongside the Institute for Race Relations. You go first, Dr. Malan.
Yes, I do think that we do have to put it into perspective. We do have to recognize that the report, which was developed by the World Bank, it did mention BEE, and it did mention that if South Africa does hope to grow, then that will be a component of it. But we should say that it wasn't a significant part of the report, and we should also mention that it's not really a scaling down, but it's a retooling or a restructuring of BEE, more along the lines of a focus on broader societal development, more along the focus of a creating of jobs, and a more broad-based approach as opposed to just a pure ownership-based focus. And that's really the contrast that the World Bank official there was emphasizing, is that we have had this very strong focus on getting ownership in larger industries, as opposed to saying, let's just get people opportunities. Let's give people the opportunity to get that first step on the career ladder so that they can eventually climb up the ladder. And that really is a feature of policy throughout the South African regulatory regime is it's almost policy in our labor market where unless you're driving a Ferrari, you're not allowed to own a car. And that really is how we've set up the labor market in many ways, is if people don't have very high positions, then they're not allowed to have any position whatsoever. And unfortunately, you can see that in the unemployment statistics, where we do have the highest unemployment rate in the world, and where we have not only that, but where 75% of those people who are unemployed have been so for over a year. So yes, we do welcome this call. We welcome any call that seeks to help those that really have no jobs whatsoever, the people who are currently the worst off, and those are unfortunately the millions of unemployed people in South Africa.
Yeah, Gabriel, I imagine since the call has been made by IRR alongside the Free Market Foundation, that you are in support of one of the calls made by the World Bank, but of course specifically this issue around easing of black economic empowerment policies.
Yeah, thank you. It is the case that the Institute has for a long time called for a relaxation of BEE premiums in the procurement process. So that's where, if the government is buying a traffic light or building a road, it can spend up to 25% extra to buy the same traffic light or build the same extent of road from someone based on their race. And our argument is, we don't have enough roads. So if you go on a value for money basis, then you save that 25%. You can actually build 25% more road and get the road in the rural area to the school, to the community that needs to be connected. So it's an inclusive growth argument that says, currently we've got a system that rewards the rich and connected. And by the way, there are a lot of white people that have benefited very nicely from BEE. Some of my high school fellow alumni, I was lucky enough to have a scholarship to a very expensive high school in Sandton. Some of those white kids who are the children of big-time multimillionaires, they did very well with BEE. So we've got a system that rewards the rich, but it means less value for money, and so less goods and services for the poor. But I want to say the Institute of Race Relations has emphasized this argument. But really, the place to go to is the Zondo report, the state capture report, which in volume 1, page 797, 796 and 7, gets into the legislative mosaic, the heart of the matter, what caused state capture, and finds that the confusion that comes out of our BEE system has facilitated state capture by making things very, very onerous to administer, very onerous to understand. And the World Bank makes exactly that point, the Zondo point. And, if I can just read one passage that I think that'll conclude my answer of welcome. I say the World Bank finds that there were these very well-intentioned policies like BEE, but today these interventions have become so cumbersome that they smother the implementation capacity of the public administration, especially local officials, and open spaces for corruption. It has been well documented that state capture left an enduring mark on South Africa's institutions through dismantling accountability mechanisms. And that is coming basically straight from the Zondo report, which found the dismantlement of accountability mechanisms by making it very hard for procurement officers to know what are they supposed to do, maximize value for money or maximize race points. Yeah. And sometimes it seems to be the one, sometimes it seems to be the other. Then you don't know what you're really supposed to do. Then you can do whatever you want to do. And South Africans, we came into this process with a lot of goodwill, a lot of enthusiasm, especially from the ANC, to save people, to help the poor. And where did it go wrong? A lot of temptation. Yeah. And confusion creates temptation. Temptation facilitates corruption. Corruption hurts the poor. That's the cycle that the Zondo reports identified and that the World Bank identified. Harvard's Kennedy Group identified this. The IMF has identified it. The international and domestic consensus is growing, and ordinary South Africans, our polling show, 2/3 would be very eager to get rid of BEE premiums in procurement, and get value for money when we spend our public fisc.
Okay, well, that's the data, of course, from IRR. We're going to hear from Dr Pali Lehohla as well, who's the former statistician-general, in a moment. But I want to get the view of the Black Business Council. We're joined by the council's CEO, Kganki Matabane. There you have it. I mean, Gabriel reads from some of it, but really, as part of this World Bank report, it says South African policymakers have attempted with good intentions to make correct historical failures by intervening through regulations like BEE. Has it worked, Kganki? And is there a sense that it is only black businesses and the elite that have benefited from BEE and it has not created jobs and economic growth? What's your view?
Naledi, good evening and thank you very much for having us. It's very interesting that since Donald Trump became president, it looks like those who are anti-transformation are becoming more emboldened. So everyone now is sounding like AfriForum and Solidarity, which is very unfortunate for the World Bank to even go there, because data that is there and then they can get it. Everything is on the internet. Firstly, we need to say what was the purpose, or what is the purpose of economic transformation? Because from where we're sitting is to correct the imbalances of the past caused by apartheid, caused by legislation. And then we have, as we're sitting now, we've got 92% of the population who owns less than 5% of the economy. We've got 70% of the CEO of JS's listed companies being white males. We've got the face of poverty being black. We've got the face of unemployment being black. So in 31 years, we made a little bit of progress, but we haven't moved as much as we wanted to move. And understandably, you cannot change the imbalances of the past 400 years with 31 years. So I don't know where those ones who are saying the broad-based economic empowerment must be done away with, where do they get all the details? Because the data is there, they can get it. As far as we're concerned, broad-based economic empowerment or the economic transformation policies can only be done away when the demographics of the country reflects the ownership, management, and control of the economy. If you go to farm ownership and smallholding ownership, it's like almost 80% of the farms are owned by white people. I'm talking about individual farms. Before people come and say government is and government owners is and this. So the data that is there does not support what those proponents of proponents who are under transformation are saying. The data is there. I'm sure when we walk around and go to any place, the people who are cleaning the toilets are not white people. The menace are not white people. We tell you we're still a way, long way before we can even talk about relaxing economic transformation. So we agree with Minister Paksau that this is the time where we're supposed to be accelerating economic transformation instead of doing away with. So we really don't support any thinking that sounds like AfriForum and Solidarity, because that is taking the country back. You cannot keep on excluding the majority of the people like we're doing in South Africa. They've done it well in excluding and perpetuating that in Europe and the US, because they are trying to empower the minority. And then when they're trying to empower the minority, you can push it as much as you want, because they will never render the country ungovernable. In South Africa, the majority will render the country ungovernable, so we cannot afford the country being rendered ungovernable, because all of us are going to lose.
Okay. All right, just stay with us, Kganki, because we're going to come back to you as we analyze what the World Bank has said. But let's bring in Dr. Pali Lehohla here. Dr. Lehohla, perhaps you can help us. Here's the unfortunate part is that as the World Bank also makes this recommendation, and essentially the wording that they've used is not necessarily to scrap BEE. They've talked about easing BEE, and you can talk to me about what you make of that. But also the World Bank has previously noted that South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world. So for 31 years, what do you make of the progress that our country has made in dealing with inequality and the impact of BEE?
I'm not sure whether we can ascribe the failures to the intentions of the BEE. I suspect it's in the practice where blacks and whites connive to undermine BEE, where some blacks sell themselves to whites to pretend that they are white. Without a very clear political program about black empowerment, we have ended up with this. So culpability is all over around people who have cheated and done all kinds of things that were not intended by black economic empowerment. Therefore, the answer is not in scrapping black economic empowerment. It's in the weaknesses of blacks being rented by whites to perpetuate the underdevelopment of blacks. Now, if you look at how apartheid was structured and formed after the Afrikaners were beaten by the British in 1920-22, they connived together to protect whiteness. And in 1933, when the Kganki report was tabled to deal with African poverty, there was a very clear policy that empowered Afrikaners. There was no black to buy Afrikaners to pretend that they are black. The policies, the instruments were all very clear. What we don't have in our system is the clarity of purpose and the clarity of instruments of power to make BEE function. It's so disturbing now, and it is the economic policies. The economic policies are directed at building those who have been empowered. If you look at the data of the statistician-general, the income and expenditure survey, I mean, you would like to hide yourself as a black person. In the period 2006 to 2023, blacks actually had purchasing power that grew in 2022 in that income and expenditure survey to 62%. For the first time, the purchasing power of blacks surpassed that of whites. Yet, when you look at ownership processes, whites still own all that. So the purchasing power, the 1.6 trillion, 1.8 trillion rands that blacks had as purchasing power went to buy in white business. So you can see the failure of the mechanics of BEE because it has to start from how do you purchase. Now, that rise in purchasing power didn't have a countervailing force to deal with ownership of factories, of all these things, so that black can purchase increasingly more from blacks. So the demise of BEE has been that of, you see income of the top quintile amongst blacks only being 13%, and amongst whites going to 73, 78%. So the black government is represented by, say, who are in the upper quintile, has to deal with this 87% people who are poor against 73% of whites who are in the upper quintile. You bring them together under a government of national unity. What do you expect the policy prescripts to be in that kind of situation? Okay. If we understand these dynamics, then we can start talking about whether a government of national unity is the answer to the black problem.
Sure. Dr. Lehohla.
You can see in terms of the voting powers.
Yeah, I think we're going to come back to you because there's so much to analyze in everything that you've said, and we, are going to look at some of the data. Dr. Lehohla asked an interesting question: is a government of national unity the answer? But there's the argument that can easily be made by our leaders is that this is how South Africans voted. This is where we find ourselves at this moment. But let's bring in Matthew Parks. He's, of course, parliamentary coordinator for Cosatu, the largest trade union federation in the country. And we bring you in, Matthew, because as part of the report by the World Bank, they talk about historical failures that have been seen. So they talk about hard regulations that have failed economic growth. And I'm really, trying to summarize it here for you. But they talk not just about black economic empowerment policies, they talk about local content, and then they highlight collective labor bargaining as a slow move to our economic growth. So firstly, your thoughts as Cosatu on easing BEE, and then the role that collective labor bargaining has had on our slow growth.
Good evening, Naledi. Thanks for having us. Look, I think our premise would be that we remained 31 years into democracy, the world's most unequal society. That is an absolute ticking time bomb. You can't have the level of ownership which largely is white male, whether it's land, whether it's property, whether it's wealth, whether it's company ownership, whether it's shares in the stock market, being historically still biased towards white, largely men, largely people in the urban areas. That's a ticking time bomb. We can't be proud to be a society where the majority of African and colored and Indian people live in absolute poverty, absolute squalor. And besides a moral perspective, besides a ticking time bomb perspective, economically, you're not going to grow the economy as long as you have wealth concentrated, 90% of wealth in 10% of the country, and then 90% of the country having 10% of the wealth. That is an absolute ticking time bomb. It is not going to grow the economy. So I think we would be very unusual if we didn't support black economic empowerment when we remain scarred by 48 years of apartheid, and of course, 3.5 centuries of colonialism. And of course, I don't think what people are saying is irrational to say, let's empower the disadvantaged, let's invest in working class, in historically impoverished communities and give them a helping hand. That's all we're saying. Not much different, actually, than what the National Party did to empower Afrikaner people to address the Afrikaner poverty question when they came to power. So we're not sure why it made sense to historically empower white people. But when it comes to undoing the damage of apartheid, we say, no, let's not assist African or colored Indian people who have been brutally suppressed. Is BEE perfect? No, of course not. And that's why you have regulations to tweak what doesn't work here and here. We would actually love to see many of the issues that Dr. Lehohla spoke about fronting. It's been abused, no doubt about it. Yeah. Should we continue should we not move to the approach of saying once empowered, always empowered? There's merit and demerit in that argument. We would love to see greater focus around employee shareholder ownership programs to really empower the most poorly paid members of society, who would be black, would also be white, Afrikaners, working class too. We'd love to see that. We also are quite keen to support locally produced goods, local businesses, some of which will be white, as opposed to this tendency of ours of simply importing cheap goods, often subsidized from overseas, from Asia and so forth. But I don't think we can move away from BEE. When you look at our socioeconomic indicators that show that how deeply unequal a society we are, that can't be a sane approach. And I agree with Naledi. I don't think the World Bank was saying do away with BEE. I think they were just simply saying balance different objectives, and we agree. But look, we've got to be able to chew gum and walk at the same time. We have a 41% unemployment rate. We've got to deal with that. We've got an inequality and poverty linked to our racial history. We've got to deal with that. And we can't choose which one to deal with. We've got to do both because they are linked together economically. But on the issue of collective bargaining, look, it's a red herring to say collective bargaining impedes economic growth. Collective bargaining covers 30% of South Africa's workforce. So 70%, largely the private sector, which the World Bank will be speaking to, isn't covered by collective bargaining. So your key economic sectors like agriculture and so forth, a lot of the retail sector, no, there's no collective bargaining there. The union rate is actually too low there. That's why often we find huge abuses of workers, the denial of the fundamental basic rights of workers, etc. But first, the reason why the economy hasn't grown is because we struggle with access to reliable and affordable electricity because of the issues of transit, which impacts upon mining, manufacturing, agricultural sectors. the issues of dysfunctional municipalities in rural areas impacting upon local businesses, the issues of corruption, of dysfunctional infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the issues we've got to deal with. People say, well, look, in South Africa it's difficult to hire and fire, but time and again that's been proven to be a myth, because in 2008, 1 million workers were fired overnight.
Yeah.
During COVID-19, 2 million workers were dismissed overnight. So it's very easy to fire and hire people. But for us, allowing a woman to go on paid maternity leave, allowing people the right to overtime pay, to work in a safe environment, that's what the labour law is about. And those are not impediments to economic growth. In fact, if you invest in workers, you treat them like your best asset, that's how you boost productivity. The issues about growing the economy, that's around infrastructure, it's around paying living wages, around stimulus, etc.
Yeah.
I think we'd be keen to go in that kind of a debate. Thanks, Naledi.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matthew. We're gonna continue with our panel, and really what I want to get into now is what next? Because certainly this is where the World Bank, is putting their ideas forward. But is there a way that we can maximize on the transformative agenda, even as these recommendations are coming from bodies as big as the World Bank? But we're taking calls. 010-594-6010. Mulwandwa is calling in from Johannesburg. Mulwandwa, good evening.
Good evening, Naledi.
Thank you so much for calling. Go ahead, talk to us on that.
Yeah, I think the remarks of the World Bank, they are so unfortunate. Given the history of our country, it's like, to be honest, it is a crime or it's a sin to be a black person, especially under the stage of apartheid for 300 and something years. So I don't know what informs there. There's nothing wrong with the policy of the Black BBEE. I think the election part of it is the lack of the government or the poor of the government mechanism in terms of monitoring and proper implementation of it. If the government can deal with the issues of corruption and making sure that each and every project or contract that is being awarded in terms of job creation, it alleviates and assists people to empower themselves. This policy is good. I mean, really, it can't say that coming from the World Bank, knowing that in equal society in South Africa, but because of apartheid, that the government must get. Because the most people that are going to be affected by this is the black people, no one else. We have seen the companies here. I'm saying here in Cape Town, yes, there are these corridors of the logistic construction there. But if you look around Cape Town, Tembisa, and surrounding areas, why the employment is not being reduced? Because these people, they are taking people from outside South Africa. People don't have the document to come and work in these companies. I mean, we only say the labor law must be let. He says that means that black people who are African, that they must work for 7 rand per hour or 750 per hour. What I want to do with that little piece of money? It can't work like this. So the comment of the World Bank is totally unfortunate, and I don't agree with it.
Thank you so much for calling in, Mulwandwa. We really do appreciate your call. Taking WhatsApps as well, 072-110-5584. And we'll keep that number up on the screen for a little bit longer. 110-5584 is the tail end of our WhatsApp number. All right, let's take a look at the WhatsApps that have come in. Victor Mudley says it will be good for the country on 2 fronts. It will bring in investment, which will lead to job creation. Secondly, only qualified people will be employed in particular job situations. A win-win for everyone, according to Victor Mudley. Seemingly in agreement there with the suggestion to ease BEE in the country. Gys Ace in Pretoria says, World Bank is some of the smartest economists in the world. The government would do well to take cognizance of their opinion. These policies are counterproductive when it comes to economic growth and job creation. SA must wake up. When we come back, we talk about what really should be done for us to see a balance between economic growth and certainly the transformative agenda also getting equal attention on the way forward. On the other side of this, stay with us. Welcome back. Well, we continue with our panel discussion where, of course, we respond with our panelists on the World Bank having encouraged South Africa to consider relaxing or easing BEE and labour policies, and we are in conversation with IR Legal or the Institute of Race Relations, Gabriel Crouse, Dr Morne Malan, who is with the Free Market Foundation, Matthew Parks of the parliamentary coordinator of Cosatu, as well as Dr Pali Lehohla, who is the former statistician-general. And I think I want to come back to you, Dr Lehohla, because this is a strong point, and Gabriel Crouse raised this earlier. There's something really that must be addressed. the report goes on to say, today these interventions have become so cumbersome that they smother the implementation capacity of the public administration, especially local officials, and open spaces for corruption. That last bit, Dr. Lehohla, the opening spaces for corruption. How do you respond to this position that says BE is open spaces for corrupt behavior?
Oh, yes, that's very true. Not because it is a bad policy, but it has fallen into the hands of dishonest people. And how do you deal with dishonest people? I mean, the situation is it's not very transparent. The local authorities, where we must make the greatest impact, are also very vulnerable. So how do you create new instruments of power that enable people at different levels to hold authority and everybody else to account? One of the things that I think we need to do is, first, our budget that the Minister of Finance reads must tell us impacts on poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Not about growth in GDP, consumer price index, prices, and all that. We have to go to impact levels. Once we've gotten to that impact levels, society and the machinery of government will be focused on impact and will dislodge most of the bottlenecks and shenanigans that go around. But to the extent that such an important document tells us about GDP, debt to GDP ratio, and all those measures that the World Bank is talking about, when they are not there in that essential document, we really are going to have a serious problem. So for me, it is that to awaken the kinds of things that we aspire as a people.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't see us getting anywhere. I mean, we'll pile laws and laws and laws to try and reinforce to deal with crooked officials. If the people on the ground don't have instruments of power to discipline the political anti-social behaviors, the capitalist anti-economic behaviors of society, we are not going to go anywhere. So our economic policies, certainly, there's something fundamentally wrong with them.
Yeah.
And they collude to corrupt and ensure that they abet corruption.
Okay.
Those economic policies.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Dr. Lehohla, they're saying we need to start measuring impact. Dr. Malan, let's bring you in here. I mean, we live in such an interesting country, right? I mean, the very makeup and structure of our economy is a capitalist one, and yet we have so many socialist sort of ideals. And perhaps you can share your thoughts on what we do, whether that be in measuring impact, as Dr. Lehohla has said, or at least in trying to come closer to what the World Bank has suggested. So even in the mechanisms, right, the how we go about easing, if we were to consider doing so.
Yes, I do think that we have sort of lost focus in a lot of the discussion up to this point. What I've noticed is that there's this, there are two sort of conflicting notions at the moment. On the one hand, we say that things haven't been working, and on the other hand, we're saying nothing needs to change. Or if there is something that needs to change, it's people's attitudes. But policies, they're not supposed to change. They're supposed to stay exactly the same. And that's despite the fact that, I mean, everybody here, I'm not sure if anybody here is going to say that the past 2 decades, past 3 decades have been an enormous success, economically speaking. That's one of the things that the report highlights, is the fact that our GDP has stagnated for the past 2 decades. That's a policy failure. That's not a failure of private investors. It's not a failure of domestic investors or international investors. It's not a failure of international institutions or our trade partners or anything else. It's a failure on our part to make investment an attractive option in South Africa. And until we get to a point where we understand that we don't have control over other people's attitudes, we only have control over the policy environment in South Africa, well, then we're not going to move forward. But we can't say that we're completely disgusted with the outcomes that we're seeing. We've got way too high levels of poverty, way too high levels of unemployment. The economy is growing far too slowly, and the conclusion is that we should just keep the policies the same and not and just hope that everybody's going to be more honest in their application of the policies. At the end of the day, the measurement of a policy, whether it's a good policy or a bad policy, has to be the outcome of that policy. And the outcomes in this case are objectively terrible. So, I mean, this really has to be a discussion of what has to change. We're not saying that there doesn't have to be redress, but what we are saying is that this form of redress really hasn't worked. And that's what the World Bank is saying as well. And I'd be interested to see if anybody's going to argue that this has succeeded on a broad basis, empowering the Black population in South Africa. Yeah, has BEE actually empowered the Black population? Gabriel, we'll bring you in here. Dr. Lehohla talked about, well, in the next few days when the finance minister delivers the budget speech, he should also give us, where we're going in terms of impact. And I immediately thought about, well, not just that. In 2025, we're also expected to have this national dialogue, right, that is supposed to bring all the various races together and have this, discussion around social cohesion. And it's almost impossible to do so without bringing up the issue of inequality. Such a big hot potato in the country. So I don't know what you put on the table in terms of that part of the discussion, because inequality and social cohesion so tightly knit together, those discussions.
Indeed. And I think that one of the bizarre things from an Institute of Race Relations perspective is that our organization was founded in 1929 to push back against white supremacist apartheid, AEE, Afrikaner Affirmative Action, or Afrikaner Economic Empowerment came before BEE, and the IRR resisted that before it resisted this. And the reason is precisely the following. These policies that try to take from one to give to another on the basis of how he or she looks do not grow the overall productive capacity. What they do is they shrink the overall productive capacity. And we saw during apartheid, given the natural resources, given the tech coming in, there was massive underperformance in the economy. Apartheid partly ended because the government went bankrupt because it had a stupid policy of racial empowerment. Then, to be fair, we needed some kind of empowerment policy to help Black people in the police, in the army, where you had entrenched white supremacist ideals, and you were never going to have trust in the police and the army unless you started to have legitimate Black police officers. So there needed to be some kind of employment equity system. But instead of phasing it out once it started to hurt the poor, just as it hurt the poor under apartheid, BEE has started to hurt the poor again, decades ago, from 2010. That's the last time we had economic growth. When you don't have economic growth, you have an apartheid-style situation where you have some powers that are rearranging the deck chairs while the whole ship is sinking. And I think that it's very important for us to say, actually, everyone here agrees on what the most important issue is. The most important issue is that there are 11 million plus unemployed South Africans. Overwhelming, there are 11 million Black South Africans that are unemployed. Almost all of the unemployed are Black. Actually, everyone who's unemployed is in deep trouble. They should all get help. But it's true. But here's the statistic that horrifies me in terms of inequality. There were roughly 6 million Black unemployed people in 2007. Now it's over 11 million. It's almost doubled during the BEE era. That is the thing that makes me think this policy, it's not a few bad apples. Dr. Lehohla, with great respect, it blames it on one or two bad actors or a few bad actors who can just change their attitude. That is not the problem. The Zondo report is more legally expert than anyone here at analyzing the root cause of state capture, which caused poverty. And the Zondo report, which no one will ever address to me, address that. Page 797, volume 1. It says corruption was facilitated by BEE confusing the procurement process, and that hurt poor people. It didn't say a few bad apples. It didn't say it was bad luck. It said the system was confusing. The system in apartheid was confusing too, in a way that got in the way of productive. It gutted the labor market. It gutted skills. It was a very, very stupid system. and we're repeating it. The IRR calls. Right now, I'll finish by saying this. When Dr. Lehohla says we need to have Treasury come forward with impact studies, what about Treasury telling us how much does BEE premiums cost?
Okay, so let me do this. Sorry, and apologies, Gabriel, and I'm not cutting you off. What I will do is I'll let you finish that thought. I need to take an ad break as well because I need to pay my bills this side as well. And listen, this is such a heated discussion. We're taking your call 01059460010. We're back in a moment, though. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition, and we're taking calls on whether or not you agree with the suggestion put forward by the World Bank that perhaps it's time for South Africa to consider easing its BEE policies and that they simply have not worked in dealing with inequality and certainly the issue around economic growth. But what do we do with the transformative agenda? Patricia's calling in from Pretoria. Patricia, good evening. Thank you so much for calling. Talk to us, Patricia.
I've seen those that are happening in the whole world. There is corruption in the whole world. But now we put aside.
Okay. No, Patricia, I'm really struggling with your line, unfortunately. It's so choppy. I'm so sorry. We're going to have to move on. I'm so sorry. That line really not doing you any help tonight. Morenedi is in Pretoria. Morenedi, good evening.
Good evening, and how are you?
I'm well, sir. Go ahead. Talk to us.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. What I want to say is that the black economic empowerment, I want to say we as black people, we used to be strong when coming to agriculture. We used to have cows, we used to milk, things that we used to be well known of. So now they are taken away by the white people. So we are now like hanging. And then when you look at the issue of black economic empowerment now, the BEE, our people now, they think opening a company and then participating and then maybe getting points and making money, they think is the way. So it's like, I don't see what we are having now as African people, because the land that we normally, we used to be well known of that, the land having our cows. You know, the riches of the black people in the olden days used to be to have cows, and then you have to have land, and then you have to do that for yourself.
Yeah.
Like I'm saying, everything is taken away. What I want to say again, tell me, the South African Reserve Bank, the duty of South African Reserve Bank, what is it doing? And then why, let's say Botswana, they are having their own bank, but it is 100% owned by the government. I suspect, I'm not happy with South African Reserve Bank because it is owned by shareholders. I don't hear it coming anyway, and then maybe just to say this is what they are doing for the country.
All right, Morenedi, that's an expansion of the discussion. Yeah, thank you. But something we'll look at into another day. And of course, some WhatsApps have come in. Let's take a look at one or two of those quickly. Don't want to leave the views of our viewers behind. Let's see those WhatsApps. Anonymous says, the World Bank's biggest shareholder is the USA. The managing director, Kristalini Gokleva, is taking mandate from the USA and Europe. African countries are just being used as rubber stamp, while USA and their European friends are making money out of us. BEE is the only way to redress what apartheid did to our people. So if World Bank want us to relax BEE policy, it means the World Bank Group is supporting apartheid. We must support BRICS Bank and boycott the World Bank. Anonymous with that one. Letabo Sekele in Centurion says, in simple terms, scrap black economic empowerment. Black people are incapable of ownership. Give them jobs, i.e. cleaning jobs, tea ladies, security jobs, etc. What a bizarre conversation to be having in 2025. We have truly regressed as a society. Feels like structural adjustments all over again. Letabo, thank you so much for that one. All right, let's go back to Gabriel and let you finish that thought. And I think I remember you were talking about what we have not looked at is the true cost. You said, I think you used the words, the premiums of a BEE. Go ahead and finish that thought for us. Your mic is off, Gabriel.
Whoops, I'm having a senior moment. Thank you very much.
Sure, go ahead.
So the question is, the Constitution says there has to be transparency and cost management.
Yeah.
And, people who want to defend the current system and people who criticize the current system, surely we can agree, and it'd be nice if this panel, we can all agree that at least we should know how much does it cost BEE premiums. That's the phrase, preference premium is the phrase used by acting Treasury Chief Procurement Officer Vili Matebula to explain that extra that you spend, where you're buying the same traffic lights or the same computer or the same bit of road, but you're spending 20% more, 25% more to buy it from a black person rather than a white person. Shouldn't we know how much that all adds up to at the end of the year? Then critics can say how many children could have gotten an extra chance with that money, how much could it have gone to some more productive persons? And proponents can say, look, we spent 20 billion on these premiums. We should actually spend 40 billion. I think everyone should know, it should be transparent. And I think my own view is that if you cut BEE premiums, it's going to be good for rich black people. It's going to be good for middle-class black people. And it's going to be good for poor black people. I think your caller, your WhatsApp, we went in there and said, it's as if we're only talking about some black people getting jobs as domestic workers or working at a cashier. That is a misimpression worth addressing. In fact, scrapping BEE, allowing economic growth, it will be so good. You know, there's more black dollar millionaires than white dollar millionaires, but they're struggling to become 10 times or 100 times more wealthy because they're stuck in an economy that's not growing because of BEE. So if we cut BEE, it's going to help the rich black people, the middle-class black people, and the poor black people. But to get there, first we have to know the numbers. How much does it cost? And I think everyone should agree we deserve as citizens, poor and rich, to know how much does it cost.
Okay, guys, I'm running out of time and I need to do this quickly. So, Matthew, your thoughts, Cosatu, an alliance partner, if you're sitting in a room with the African National Congress and there's a policy discussion and perhaps, you know, you put on the table, well, you know, ANC, this is a suggestion that's been put forward on the World Bank. What do you say to your alliance partner in that discussion?
Yeah. Look, I think number one is that it's a misnomer. I think it's a bit of a false herring to say B is responsible for corruption. It's a victim of corruption like every other part of society. And I think it's also wrong. And I don't think the Zondo Commission said B is the reason why the economy has grown or why state capture happened. The principles are correct. We've got to give a helping hand to 90% of society, which was historically disadvantaged. That's how we're going to grow as an economy. The modalities of B, no one is married to them. That's why you have regulations. That's why it's tweaked now and then. That's why we would love to see it. The abuses of the wealth are being addressed. How can we make it more inclusive? How can we direct it more towards low-income persons, workers, through the employee shareholder schemes, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the principles remain correct. We have to have an inclusive society. And economic growth is not alien to BEE. The two are complementary. You can't have one or the other. And we can't sustain a society when we're the most unequal nation in the world. And I think if we think we can, we'll be heading towards very, very dangerous territory. And it's one day going to explode upon all of us. Like we saw the July 2021 violence, we cannot sustain our status as the most unequal society in the world. So we've got to do many things simultaneously. Fixing the state, growing the economy, addressing poverty, creating jobs. We don't have the luxury of choosing which one to deal with. We've got to deal with all of them, to be honest.
Great stuff. All right, Matthew, thank you so much. Dr. Lehohla, I'll give you the final one here as our number cruncher for the evening. If you were sitting in that discussion that, you know, I just pictured in my mind there with Matthew Parks and his alliance partners, and there was a discussion about policy, what would your input be on who needs to step up for the transformation agenda and then what we do with this suggestion of easing BEE?
Well, I think the problem is that our economic policies are really screwed up. And that's the first problem. In a way, then they create misdemeanors in the BEE. So for me, that's the most fundamental point, that the neoliberal policies are not going to help BEE. They'll abet corruption. That is where the problem is. So until we have resolved that issue of economic policies in South Africa, which have financialized the economy and abandoned manufacturing, have actually increased levels of unemployment. That's where the problem is. BEE, under a different set of policies, would thrive.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate the views that have come in from all of our guests, and what a discussion. Not an easy one, but I think an important one nonetheless. Thank you so much to Gabriel Crouse, the Executive Director of IRR Legal, who is, of course, with the Institute for Race Relations, Dr Morne Malan, who's Deputy Head of Policy at the Free Market Foundation, Matthew Parks, a Parliamentary Coordinator of Cosatu, and of course Dr Pali Lehohla, former Statistician-General this evening. We did also hear from Kganki Matabane, the CEO of the Black Business Council. Keep the WhatsApps coming in though, 072 110 5584. You certainly can keep the conversation going on X as well, at Newzroom 405. We've got more news on the other side of this short break. Stay with us.